Wild Talents, by Charles Hoyfort, Chapter 31b. The Sheriff of Exeter, behind whom was Great Britain. The sheriff waved his hand. It represented justice and Great Britain. The bolt was drawn, but the trapdoor did not fall. John Lee stood with the noose around his neck. It was embarrassing. He should have been strangling. There is something of an etiquette in all things, and this was indecorum. They tinkered with the bolt. There was no difficulty whatsoever with the bolt. But when it was drawn, with John Lee standing on the trapdoor, the door would not fall. Something unreasonable was happening. Just what is the procedure in the case of somebody who is standing erect when he should be dangling? The sheriff ordered John Lee back to his cell. The people in the prison yard were not so stolid. They fluttered, and groups of them were talking it over. But there was no talk that could do John Lee any good. This was what is called stern reality. The sheriff did not flutter. I have a note upon him 20 years later. He was in trouble with a religious sect of which he was a member, because he ordered his beer by the barrel. He was as solid as beer and beef and the British government. The warders looked into the matter thoroughly, except that there wasn't anything to look into. Every time they drew back the bolt, with John Lee out of the way, the door fell, as it should fall. One of the warders stood in Lee's place, where, instead of placing the noose around his neck, he clung to the rope. The bolt was drawn, the door fell, as it should fall, and down dropped the warder, as he should drop. There was a woman they could not push, a man they could not crucify, the man they could not drown. There was the man they could not imprison, the dog they could not lose. John Lee was led back to the scaffold. The witnesses did not know whether to be awed or not. But, after all, it was just one of those things that nobody could explain, but that could not happen again. Or that to a college professor it could not, to anybody educated in the principles of mechanics and physics it could not, that, to anybody, not an untutored laboring man, but committed to unquestioning belief in everything that a professor of physics would say and maintaining that the trapdoor would have to fall. The bolt was drawn. The trapdoor would not fall. John Lee stood unhungable. That when, the first time, John Lee was led past these newspaper men, and town officials, and others who had been invited to the ceremony, any one of them could have overstepped any line that all were told to toe would have been little short of inconceivable. But a doctor, whose professional appearance was much faded, interceded. Others were shaky. The sheriff said that John Lee had been sentenced to be hanged, and that John Lee would be hanged. They had done everything thinkable. Any suggestions? Somebody suggested that rains might have swollen the wooden door, causing friction. There had been, in all tests, no friction. But, by way of taking every possible precaution, the warder planed the edges of the door. They experimented, and, every time, the door fell, as it should fall. They stood him on the scaffold again. The door would not fall.